Hello, class. In this video, we're going to add a bunch of shadows to our drawing. See, shadows are very important to many different kinds of drawings because it really is the way that the human brain sees the world. It sees three dimensions in shadows. So adding to our shadows to our drawing might seem subtle, but the reality is it's going to really make it look much more realistic and better to interpret. Now, obviously, when we rendered it from our building, it came in with shadows on its faces. But there's still other shadows we have to add for all the elements we added, and there's probably going to even be some shadow work for the building itself. Okay, so the way we're basically going to add shadows, we're going to put black on our drawing and make it transparent. It's going to look like shadows. There's some simple tricks to make sure that it works pretty easily. So the first thing I want to do is actually look at the building itself. Well, we do have shadows on the building. We'll notice that there's no shadow on the ground back here. Now, the way I happen to import my building, I lost the shadow that's on the ground. It's possible you have it on the ground, in which case you don't need to worry about this step. But if you don't, I'm going to show you how to add back a shadow onto the ground most easily. So the first thing I'll need to do is, of course, make a layer for shadows too. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new layer, and I think you could add the layers in many different spots. I think for this purposes, I'm going to add a layer above my grass layer, so it's all the way up top. Now it's going to there'll be some consequences to that, but because the grass has to be on top of the building layer, and some of the shadow, especially this person, is going to have to be on top of the grass in that area. That's where the shadow wants to be. So I'm going to set it there. It's mostly on top of most of the layers, and I think that'll be a good spot. So now let's take a look at the building. Now we're just going to estimate shadows for this assignment. That's true for the building and for the people and everything else. As long as you basically understand where the shadows are coming from, you can make it look real enough just by drawing it in. It's not that bad. Now we already know that the sun is going to be over here on the right hand side somewhere coming in. And that's going to be useful to us. For the building, we actually have greater clues as to what the shadow might look like, and that's because you can open your 3D modeler and see what they look like, and that's what I'm going to do. I did this in SketchUp, so I'm going to jump into SketchUp, just take a quick look at the shadows and see what they look like. So in SketchUp, you can see that I have this long shadow across the ground back here. Now, the reason why it didn't come in my rendering was because I rendered through Enscape, and Enscape will only put shadows on other objects, and I had us, for this assignment, remove the ground plane so that we could do it in Photoshop. Now, if you had a ground plane in, the shadow would come in. Or if you did it right from SketchUp, you can see SketchUp will assume a ground plane, whether there's actual surface there or not. Nonetheless, I can see that this is coming out nearly at the same angle as my house. It's a little bit up, and it reaches almost to this uh, chair over here and then comes back and comes back in. So I'm going to roughly sketch that in. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect, and yours is going to be different, so draw in what you need to. And like I said, when in doubt, when you need to do something, just draw it. It's perfectly fine to draw things, and Photoshop is a great spot to do that in. So I'm going to go to Shadow, Layer. I'm going to go to my polygon marquee. I'm going to zoom in down in here, and I'm going to come from this corner, and I'm going to stretch out almost at the same angle as my house, just up a little bit, pretty much to that chair back there. And then I'm going to come in some distance, just estimating it, and I'm going to come back at that same angle, and I'm going to come back here. Now I overextended on top of the house, and I'll just do this for demonstration purposes. I'm going to fill this black. So I'm going to edit, fill, set your contents to black, and say OK. Now I've had the shadow on top of the house, which I don't want, so I'll just need to clean that up. If you didn't select the house, perfectly fine. But if you did, like me, just deselect your selection set there, redo the poly lasso tool to select the area over your house, and press delete. Just like that, Control D to deselect. And now I've got, oops, sorry about that, hit the wrong button. Now I've got the shadow cast accurately enough to fool the eye. Now it's a little dark, so we can see compared to the rest of my shadows, it's a little dark. So we're going to take care of that is we're going to change our opacity, and we're going to pull it down. Now you're going to want to set your opacity that you think matches your shadows. Usually it's going to be around 50%, but depending on your lighting, it could be less or it could be more. I actually think in my case, it wants to be a little bit more than 50%, maybe not quite 60, but probably pretty close to it. So again, just use your best judgment call there. When you zoom out, now I've set that down. It even looks more like that house is set into the landscape. So we are good there. But we have to add shadows to a lot of other elements. And I'm going to show you a quick way of doing that. We can no longer look at our SketchUp model for clues, but we have enough information in Photoshop to make this really easy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find this layer that is my scale figure, because I'm going to do this guy next. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure I'm still on the shadow layer, okay? But I'm going to press Control on my keyboard, and I'm going to click what I call the icon of the layer, which is this box right here, and click. You will notice that now I've selected everything that's on that layer. In this case, it's the man, but I haven't changed layers. I'm still on the shadow layer. What I'm going to do is I'm also going to fill this black. So edit, fill black. Okay. Now it doesn't look like anything happened, but if I just quickly, just as for a demonstration, if I turn the eyeball off on the man, the scale figure, you see that the black silhouette exists underneath him. He's just on a layer underneath him, which is totally fine. And so now that he's still selected, I'm going to distort this shadow into the actual shadow shape that it should be pretty easily. So watch this. I'm going to go Edit, Transform, Distort. I'm going to come to this middle button, or this middle box right here. I'm going to click and hold and pull down on it. I want to make sure it sort of is at the same angle as the shadow of the house I just drew, which is, pretty steep and off to the side. And in my case, my shadows are pretty long. Yours may not be, and they certainly may be at a different angle, but I want to approximate that angle, approximate what I think the person length would be to match, and then press Enter to set it. And I'll do Control D to deselect, and now I've got a shadow of that person on the ground and on top of the path and everything else, and it's looking like he's really set into the landscape. So that's great. And I want to keep doing this for anything else you have in your drawing. I'll show you the rest of mine. Yours is going to be slightly different depending on what you added, but let's talk about trees. Okay, and the trees are pretty much done the same way as this person is. There's just a few little tricks I want to show you along the way, slight subtleties as we go. Now let's start with the tree furthest back. That's this tree here. Now this tree, the shadow is going to be on the ground. It's going to be behind the building, so I don't need to worry about it. So let's come to this tree over here. Well, this tree certainly will have a shadow on the ground here. We should be able to see it. So I could do the same thing. I could find that tree in the layer list, which is right here. I could press Control on the icon, and I get the selection set of the tree here. It looks pretty good, but there is one issue. If I fill this black, it will only fill black on the part that's on my board. It won't fill black out here. And so it could impact the way my shadow looks. And so I'm not actually going to use that. I'm going to do Control D to deselect temporarily. And even though we don't need a shadow on this tree is entirely in my drawing, and it's shaped like a tree. So I'm actually going to do that tree. And I'm going to end up using this tree for most of my tree shadows. By the time you distort them, you won't even know it's the same tree. It's going to look good enough. Again, because the reason why I'm going to do that, I clicked on here, is because this tree is entirely in the drawing. So when I fill it black, same thing, edit, fill, black, I will get the full aspect of the shadow. And what I'm just going to do now that I have that is I will come in and I'll move that shadow to over here. And if you want to scale it a little bit larger to match the fact that this tree is larger, you can do that. So we can go Transform, Scale. I can just pull it up from the corner a little bit, and then right while you're in it, you can continue to go to Transform, Distort, and you can pull it back in that direction. That's back at that angle. Sometimes I even make trees a little wider because their trees are bushy, and so making them wider at the corner or at the side can just sort of give it a decent effect. Using the Distort tool to push it into whatever shape you need to. Now, a couple notes about the tree shadows. One is, if I put it at the base like I did the person, you're going to have the trunk stick out and the trees up here. But because these leaves are actually well in front of the trunk, you want to just shift the shadow so it's sort of in the middle of the trunk like this, okay? And then you can set it. I'll just set it. I'll press Control D to deselect. Now, one of the issues is you can see the trunk sticks out, which wouldn't happen. So we just need to do a few tweaks to this tree shadow to make it look right. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come with the polygon select. I'm just going to quickly just select around the trunk make it wider, it doesn't matter, and press delete to get rid of the trunk, control D to deselect. Now I've got the tree along the grass and along the path as it might be. Now the other thing, because of my layer order, I also have the shadow up the trunk, which may sort of be true. I mean, the reality is you have the lighting, in theory, semi-correct, but it's way too big. So I'm just going to pull the trunk out. I'm just going to select, using my polygon lasso, just pretty much around that trunk. I could do this a different way, but I'm doing it this way, and then pressing delete for my shadow as well. And there we go. Now I've got shadow on the ground for the tree, and it sort of has a nice crinkly tree shape as it should along the ground. And I've just got a couple more trees. This tree over here, this was actually part of my 3D model, so I can't select it. It's also off the image like the other one. So again, I'm just going to use this tree as my main selection set. Go down, hover over the icon there, press Control, just do the same thing, edit, fill, black, and I'm going to move it over here and distort it. I'm going to, just do a couple more shadows here. There will be a step at the end of this video that is really interesting as well. So if you want to skip ahead to that, you can. But there's a few notes I'm going to make along the way for each of these new trees that I do. So this tree is up, somewhere up in here. And I like the idea of it sort of being cast a little bit on the building. So I might move it over just a bit and do that so it looks like it's on the building. Now, I would say the way that this is sort of appropriate for looking like it's on the ground. But as it moves up the surface, we might fake that in with a few paintbrush moves. I might go to paintbrush, set my color to black, and just paint this up a little bit, like up that surface as might happen. Just sort of fake it in the way that it's going to sort of come at an angle down that side of that wall just a little bit. And I'm clicking a bunch of times just to give it a little bit of roughness like a tree might be. So something like that you can see is going to make it feel like more as vertical surface to the flat surface. So again, fake things into what you think they look like. A little bit of eye, just a couple clicks can go a long way. All right, so there we go. There's that tree shadow. And then lastly, this tree shadow is going to cast a nice big shadow down in here on the foreground. Again, because most of this tree is off the screen, I'm just going to go and use the same tree here as my base for the shadow. So I'll do Control here, edit, fill, black, move it down here. Now this can be a lot bigger, so I'll do Control T to get to scale. Doesn't have to be as big as the original. The reality is I probably want to get some of these crinkles, nicely in here. So I'll try this for now. I can always scale it more later if I need to. I'll go to Edit, Transform, Distort, pull it down this way. Again, I'll probably make it wider this way, just like that. Yeah, there we go. Look at this, is coming out pretty good. I want to make it wider because, the leaves are pretty much down in there, and something like that. I might go with that. That seems a little big. In theory, if I had the shadow, this tree is going to cast quite a big shadow on my foreground. I'm not sure I want it quite that large, just because might not want the image to get too dark in the foreground, but I think it's okay. I'll go for it. Again, I can always adjust this at a later time if I need to. So I'll put it down there, and you can see even though I use this tree here, it doesn't look like it's necessarily belongs to that tree, but I get the nice leaf shape of that shadow as needed. And there we go. I've got the shadows on my image. Now there's one little trick I want to show you. If you used a nice rendering engine like Enscape like I have, you'll notice that the shadows on the building, their edges are a bit fuzzy. And that happens in the real world due to any number of reasons. But what we have done here, our shadows that we've added have a very crisp edge. There's a real simple way of fixing that. I'm just going to do it here at the end. I've got my shadow layer selected. I'm going to go to Filter. I'm going to go to Blur, and I'm going to go to Gaussian Blur, and you will notice that it's very subtle. I'll do it to an extreme case here so we can just see what happens. If I pull my radius up, those shadows get very blurry. Now, you don't want it quite that high. You're probably going to be around 8 to 10 would be my guess, is what's going to look pretty good on this. There's no exact number, but yeah, I'm going to go around 10. I think that looks good. It just fuzzes out those edges a little bit. It makes it look that much more realistic and subtle and soft. So again, shadows, go a long way into making this thing look real. And you should go and add wherever the shadows you need to add, go ahead and do that, and set the transparency for whatever you need, the direction for whatever you need, the blur for whatever you think works best. And now you've really got an image that's coming together well. There are still a few things we want to do to really pull this whole image together. So we'll start going over those finishing touches as they were in the next video.